Takina, takina, takitakina, mai ngā manu o te rangi, karanga mai, karanga mai, karanga mai. Karanga mai ana, te reo, o ta tātou hui ki te tī, ki te tā, e ngai wi whāno. Whāno, whāno mai te tō, kia haumi e, hui e, taiki e. This week, on the Hui.
Recent government changes are sidelining our rangatahi.
Young people who are homeless, they are at the bottom of the list.
Young, alone, and living rough.
Doesn't seem like the government understands how much of a risk they are putting these children, these young people's lives in.
And Minister for Youth, James Meager, joins us to talk about youth justice, homelessness, and mental health.
Ngā mate o te wā e haere anei mui te aroaro o Ngāi Wi Haramai. Haere. Tātou kei te pito ora ti hewa mauri ora, and welcome back to the Hui. Youth advocates claim that almost half of those who experience homelessness in Aotearoa are rangatahi and tamariki, and that they're seeing an increased demand to find them a roof over their head. It backs up research that shows rangatahi Māori and Pacific young people are more likely to live in private rentals or public housing, experience poorer housing conditions, severe housing deprivation, and more frequent and involuntary moves than European young people. Since the coalition government's reforms to emergency housing last August, youth are being pushed down emergency housing waitlists, and that's led to more of them being exposed to dangerous and precarious living situations.
The glittering nightlights of Aotearoa's biggest city conceal a grim reality. Somewhere here, under bridges, in doorways, hundreds of homeless seek shelter, many of them young and alone.
What's it like not having a whare and a roof over your head and a bed to sleep in? What's that like?
It's really dangerous. The streets, they're pretty dangerous for young people like me to be there.
What kind of dangers?
Violence, drugs, sleeping in public is real dangerous. And the bridges and car parks.
Kat's called the streets home since she was 10. She's now 24, and in that time living on the street has become even more unsafe for rangatahi like her.
We're talking about young people experiencing homelessness. We're talking about, in some cases, children living on the street, living in environments where they are at constant risk of being physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, where their lives at times are at risk.
Youth worker Aaron Hendry runs Kickback, a service based in central Tāmaki offering wraparound support for at-risk rangatahi.
It's been really good because I'm learning from here how to pretty much cook, have showers, because I've never learned how to do that, so yeah, it's quite good.
Right now, Kickback's monitoring around 100 or so young people in the city. The youngest is, 11, 12, 13. A lot of our young people are now being directed towards lodges and hostels. These environments are often really unsafe. The pricing is often exploitative. Talking like $660 for a tiny, tiny room that is dark and mouldy and cold and damp. It doesn't seem like the government understands how much of a risk they are putting these children, these young people's lives in. This is a crisis.
Homelessness in Auckland has grown 53% in the last quarter, and that's only those sleeping with no shelter. Several factors have contributed to this. Firstly, the government slashed $20 million from rangatahi transitional housing in last year's budget.
Since then, we've seen more young people seeking support, being denied that support and sleeping rough and being in really dangerous situations as a result.
Then in August, the government changed the rules around emergency housing criteria, giving preference to families over young people, which has left rangatahi like Kat more vulnerable than ever.
I had slept in my car with a friend of mine. We went to Work and Income We tried to ask for some help and housing, but they just turned us away and said no.
We've noticed in our stats that nearly 100% of our young people have been declined from emergency housing.
Māhera Maihi has seen it become harder for rangatahi to even get on housing waitlists. She runs He Pā Piringa, a 10-bed accommodation facility for homeless youth.
As soon as I moved in and saw the area and how spacious it was, I fell in love straight away. And everything was here, beautiful kitchen. I was like, fantastic. I was like, holy, cool as.
Zavania Mead has recently moved in.
Easy as rules, just keep it clean. It's really standard. Just show up on time, look after the place. So yeah, have high standards and keep it that way.
It's a tikanga-based kaupapa Māori solution to the housing crisis.
The rules of the marae are exactly the same rules when you come to our whare. When you go to your marae, you know you've got to take your shoes off at the marae. You know that if you got angry, you can't punch holes in your marae. You will get in trouble for doing that. Same. At our whare, you don't punch holes in the walls.
All young people here have to stay a year to learn the skills they need.
How do you become a good custodian of your space, your whare, the people in your whare, the belongings inside of your whare? If you can learn those skills at He Pā Piringa, you can transfer them into your life and you can use them wake tonu atu for forever. We've had 0 property damage, 0 police call-outs for violence against each other, which is an achievement in itself. It's unheard of, not just in New Zealand, but actually all over the world in terms of youth transitional housing. We had people who were really keen to hear what Māori solutions look like, because in the world, Māori are trailblazing in so many areas in so many ways, and their thinking was that that would transfer over to youth homelessness as well.
He Pā Piringa can't keep up with demand.
Over 100 young people on the wait list, and we've only got 22 beds available.
But once their time is up, they face more uncertainty.
So now all I'm focused on is trying to get mahi because I need money to carry on.
We are very clear with them. We're only here for a small time in your life. We're only going to be able to do this much. But then where do they go? And if hapu and iwi aren't fully resourced, then it does come back to the government. It does come back to those people to fill in the gaps.
Think about the reality that for some children, the first time they get a roof over their heads, the first time they get food in their bellies, the first time they get some form of stability is in a prison for children. When you actually start to reflect on that, something is going seriously wrong in our communities. Something is seriously wrong with our priorities. And that's the consequences of homelessness. That's the consequences of abandoning, our children.
Rangatahi like us, most of us don't have a choice. And seeing them like this is heartbreaking.
There are times where they're leaving our doors and we fear whether we'll see them again. And that's the thing that keeps me up at night, is that we're going to lose someone. That one of the young people that we care for and we love is going to die because they are in the wrong place at the wrong time, or because they give up hope.
Kei te tunu mai e ngai iwi. After the break, we have the Minister for Youth, Hunting and Fishing and the South Island to Waiponamu. The Honourable James Meager is with us live from Parliament. Kia ora mai anō. Whaiwhai ake I te kōrero e pā ana ki te hunga rangatahi a Tiu Maira, he pēhea nei ngā whakaro o te minita take taiohi. He is the Minister for Youth. He's also the Minister for Hunting and Fishing and for the South Island to Waiponamu. He's also a member of the iwi o Ngāi Tahu, He Uri no Tahu Pōtiki. The Honourable James Meager joins us now, as you can see, from Parliament in Te Whanganui-a-Tara in Wellington. E te minita, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Julian. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's talk about rangatahi housing and homelessness here. Is the government doing enough, do you think, to support these rangatahi so affected by a lack of housing?
Well, we're certainly making big investments in housing, and I've watched the clip, and it's shocking to think that we can live in a society still where we have homeless people, and especially homeless young people. And so as a government, we are doing, I think, everything we can to try and address these issues, whether that is provide more housing in general, more social housing places, move people off the emergency housing list and into sustainable long-term housing, and in particular in my portfolio, focusing on how we can support young people in general.
Yeah, and I know, again, there is some other ministerial responsibility with the Associate Minister of Housing, Te Pōtara, and with Minister Chris Bishop. Nevertheless, though, $20 million was taken out of last year's budget for rangatahi transitional housing. Many of the advocates said this is going to have, and has actually had, an impact on rangatahi and a lack of housing and homelessness now. What's your response to that?
Well, there are lots of ways we can address this issue, and part of that is attacking the underlying problems around the social issues causing youth homelessness. And I'm looking at that in my portfolio. I'm trying to direct my officials to make sure our investment is going into outcomes that benefit young people in terms of homelessness. But you saw on the weekend big announcements from Minister Willis around the Social Investment Agency and the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going into programs to help support transitional housing and getting whānau and families through into housing and safe from family violence. So there are a lot of initiatives happening in these kinds of areas, and we're a government that's willing to invest in the programs that work, and that's why we need that social investment approach to prove the programs that are generating the outcomes so that we can invest in those ones that are working.
Okay, but the advocates say that the $20 million was working and would have worked more had it not been taken out. So are you saying that they've got it wrong?
Well, there's a challenge there because in a number of these programs that we look into, it is difficult to see where the outcomes come, and I'm certain that some of those programs were delivering good outcomes. But one of the challenges that I find in some of the things that we are doing, in particular in the youth portfolio, is that a lot of the organisations we fund don't have access to the data or the information to be able to demonstrate what they're doing is achieving the goals and the outcomes that government need them to achieve, whether that's getting young people into sustainable housing or into education or employment. So I think as a government we've got to look at that social investment approach, provide the data and the information to those organisations so that they can demonstrate what they're doing is working. But in terms of ongoing long-term investment, we are committed to making sure that everyone has the chance for long-term sustainable housing and to fix the causes of those underlying issues, which come down to, you know, better jobs, better incomes, sustainable employment and higher education.
Minister, I hear the point. However, when I hear things like social investment, I hear time. The Waitangi Tribunal NY 2750 said that the government has breached its obligations in dealing with rangatahi homelessness now. Are you simply not going hard enough, fast enough now?
No, I would disagree with that. I mean, we are spending more in the social development space and in housing and in health and education than we ever have before as a country. We've got to do both things. We have to tackle the upfront issues right now, so making sure that we look at challenges like homelessness and housing deprivation and supporting programs around housing first and in the various community housing projects in and around Auckland and Te Waipounamu, but also the social investment approach so that we can invest early in our young people's lives so that in 15, 20 years' time we're not dealing with the same outcome. We can do both things at once.
Okay, and you mentioned the lack of measurement, or robust measurement, should I say, in terms of achieving outcomes. I mean, you talked about outcomes in your maiden speech. I think you said when we look at spending as an investment rather than a cost, we can focus on outcomes that benefit not only the health and well-being of the individual, but also the back pocket of the taxpayer. So how do we measure that then, Minister? How do we measure to know that we're going to get the success of the outcomes that you were talking about in your maiden speech?
There is a very large data set that contained within government called the IDI, the Integrated Data Infrastructure, and that contains a whole range of information that various government agencies hold on us as individuals, non-identifiable, but things like what are our educational outcomes, what's our exposure to the criminal justice system, what is our access to healthcare, what are our income rates. The government holds this data on all sorts of individuals, so we can use that to match against programs and say, well, for this cohort that you've worked with, can we track their progress sort of in the medium to long term to see whether or not they are accessing housing at a higher rate or they are having fewer incidences of family violence. We actually do have access to some of that data, but I understand a lot of these organisations that we contract to work with are small, they're nimble, they're on the ground, and they don't have the resource or the time or the capacity to try and get into that research themselves. So I think that's the kind of thing that government can help with, and it's the kind of thing that the Social Investment Agency, I think, is well placed to do.
Okay, you're also the new minister. It's a new portfolio for Te Waipounamu, for the South Island, brought up in Timaru, Te Tihi o Maru. What will be achieved by the new minister for the South Island by the next election in 2026?
I'm glad you've given me 18 months because a lot of people have asked what have I achieved now. So in the past few months I've been trying to get around the island as much as possible, and you've lived there, you know what it's like. It's a big place to try and get around. I was just in Dunedin and Lawrence over the weekend. But the priorities for me are really that economic growth picture, and it's not growth for growth's sake, but it is the point that when we get growth, we get higher jobs, higher incomes, we get better jobs, we get more opportunities for our people. So success for me in 18 months' time looks like more growth for the South Island. It looks like fewer incidences of, law and order and crime and police call-outs. It looks like more jobs. It looks like fewer hospitalisations and higher vaccination rates, all those things that we can target into the South Island around that growth picture.
It sounds like an advocacy role, Minister, to be frank. It sounds like you're going to be an advocate and working with other ministers rather than ploughing your own path. Is that what it is?
I think that's a relatively good way of describing it, because I think what the Prime Minister's tasked me with is to take an all-of-government approach to issues that particularly affect Te Waipounamu, and so part of that is looking into other areas and other portfolios and saying what are the priorities for us down south, whether that's in tourism or agriculture or education or healthcare, and how can I have an impact? How can I play an advocacy role for those ministers and try to make sure there is enough attention or enough nuance given to the different issues that we face down south? And look, I mean, as you travel around Te Waipounamu, you see the issues that we face in where I come from in South Canterbury are different to those on the West Coast or to Central Otago. So it's not as though everything in the South Island needs to be treated the same as well. So it's about making sure that nuance is made clear to ministers.
Stay with us. We have more from the Minister, James Meager, after this on the Hui. Given he's Ngāi Tahu, we're also going to talk to him about issues related to Ngāi Tahu. E hare ake anei te ui tātata hui toranga pū. Whakarongo maira. I'm here no te wā ko te hui tēnei, the Minister, the Honourable James Meager. Minister is with us from Parliament. Kia moko whiti anō tātou ki te whare pāremata I ai nei. Minister, as I said, you are a descendant of Ngāi Tahu. Rāpaki, te raki whakaputa, Ngāti Wheke. What have Ngāi Tahu told you they want from you as the Minister of Te Waipounamu?
Well, they've told me fairly similar things that what most people around home have told me. They want jobs, opportunities, growth for our people. They want to have the ability to undertake developments and initiatives and conservation on their lands like we all do. So I think this whole idea that there is distinct differences between what Ngāi Tahu want and what Te Tauihu, iwi at the top of the South Island want, or anyone else, kind of fade away when you actually get down to the nitty-gritty of figuring out what is it that is important to us. Well, it's about making sure that we are happy, healthy families, that we've got jobs and we've got incomes and we can prosper, and that's what Ngāi Tahu want.
Okay, and the kaiwhakahaere, Justin Tipa, and actually Te Runanga Ngāi Tahu, has been very strident on some coalition government policies. Obviously on the Treaty Principles Bill, the Regulatory Standards Bill, and I will talk to you also about the Nelson Tents case as well. Is your role to work with iwi and to liaise between iwi and the coalition government when it comes to these thorny issues that Ngāi Tahu has squarely pegged upon this government and not been happy with this government about?
Well, the good thing about Justin and the team at Ngāi Tahu, and actually a lot of our Runanga and iwis, they already have great relationships with ministers and with government. But if there are particular areas that I can help in or bring some focus to, I'm more than happy to. So I sat in a room on Friday morning with the Runaka down Ōtākau talking about some of the opportunities down south to try and make sure that we attract people to live and to create employment opportunities down there. So if there is a particular focus that any particular hapu or iwi want me to take up for us down south and bring to ministers, I'm happy to do so.
Okay. And you talked about Te Tauhu. I just wanted to ask you, where is your thinking at with regards to the Nelson Tents case? It is squarely with the coalition government to deal with that issue now. Do you have a role there?
Well, there are proceedings that are before the court, so I think we need to allow those to play their way through. I've got some knowledge in this space because I've had some work in this area in the past through a law firm that I acted for, so I won't say too much more on that. But the position is pretty clear from both sides. The court case is working its way through, and so I think we need to let that play out before we see where ministers lie on any particular decision.
Okay, and at the risk of getting the same answer to this question, I'm going to ask it anyway. You're Ngāi Tahu. Ngāi Tahu says they own the fresh water. Do Ngāi Tahu own the fresh water, Minister?
Well, that's not the government's position, and again, both sides are making their arguments very forcefully in the courts at the moment. So again, we'll allow the courts to go through that process and come to a decision. And look, if there is an outcome that the Parliament sees as being inconsistent with what the law was intended to be, then Parliament always reserves that right to be the ultimate say into what the law is and should be. But again, we'll let that court case play through, we'll let the judge hear the arguments from both sides, and then again, ministers can make decisions at the end of that.
Minister, you chaired the Justice Select Committee with the Treaty of Waitangi, the Treaty Principles Bill. Mm-hmm. There is a Regulatory Standards Bill coming to Parliament, and that debate happening next week. Māori have had hikoi. There's a planned haka supposedly happening tomorrow at 3:30. How would you characterise the Crown's relationship with Māori now?
Well, I mean, it all depends on who you ask and what people think the relationship should be. In some areas it's been tense and stretched over various policies that people disagree with. In other areas, Crown and iwi Māori are working really well together. There are many areas around housing developments, for example, up in Nelson that we mentioned before. In Waimea, there is a rather significant development going on up there that's going to create housing for quite a number of people up there. So in some areas, yep, there's a bit of tension, and there's always going to be because we don't agree on everything. But in other areas, we work really well together. So I think you've got to take all the stuff on balance.
And I get that point that you're trying to make. Nevertheless, these were big. The Treaty Principles Bill was a massive issue. The Regulatory Standards Bill, I mean, the tribunals called for an immediate halt and for meaningful conversation with Māori that your party and the coalition government wants to move forward on. So I get the point you're trying to make, that you've got to look at things of balance. But these are big issues for Māori, and you would be aware of that. So is the answer simply that we just need to take everything on balance? Or is the answer actually to Māori to say, look, we should have a better conversation about these things rather than rushing it through coalition agreements?
Well, part of the argument, I think, is we've got to take these things on balance because that's a pretty, I think, mature way of approaching all these issues. But we've also got to be careful about when we say Māori think this or Māori think that. I mean, there's no homogenous worldview on these things, and you don't get to have some people who have a particularly strong view on an issue come out there and say that they speak for all Māori on a particular topic or a particular piece of legislation. So we've got to be cautious that when we say, you know, Māori are against X or Māori are for Y, that we actually don't lump us all together and and in this sort of same homogenous thought speak that seems to happen all the time. And in the Regulatory Standards Bill, we're talking about a piece of legislation which I don't even think has been introduced to Parliament yet. So how people can comment on its merits or otherwise without having actually seen the bill, I'm not too sure whether that's a conversation that we can even get into until we've actually seen the bill and tried to figure out what the effects of it are.
Come on, Minister, you're not naive enough to suggest that Māori don't know what's going to be coming in that Regulatory Standards Bill. That's the same rhetoric that your coalition partner, particularly David Seymour, said was coming in the Treaty Principles Bill, and what he said and what Māori thought would happen, that was going to be in that bill, happened in that bill. You can't be so naive to suggest that Māori don't know what's coming in the RSB, surely.
Well, again, we're talking as though there is a homogenous world, one world view that all Māori hold. And I just disagree with that proposition. I mean, you've got the author of a particular piece of legislation who whakapapas Māori himself. So then what is the consequence of saying that if you disagree with a particular Māori worldview, does that mean you no longer count as being Māori? I mean, how can that be the case? So I kind of, to use a phrase that's been overused, I reject the proposition, or I reject the assertions made in the question in the first instance. I just don't think you can view it that way.
Okay, but do you think there's been meaningful consultation? Seriously? I mean, that's the point, right, is the meaningful consultation point with Māori.
On the Regulatory Standards Bill?
Well, throughout the process of Treaty Principles Bill, and actually in terms of the RSB as well, I know there's a process, but nevertheless there is meaningful consultation under the principles of the Tiriti o Waitangi that should occur. Do you think that's happened?
Well, for the Regulatory Standards Bill, the way I understand it, it's been out there for consultation for a number of months, and there's been, I think, tens of thousands of people have had their view on that. And then if you talk about the Treaty Principles Bill, I mean, I sat there and I chaired close to 50 hours of submissions on that bill, and certainly a number of people quite strongly and quite forcefully had their say on and actually presented a range of views on whether or not that bill was worth going forward or not. So, look, I think at the end of the day, some people aren't going to be happy with any level of consultation on some of these issues, and they want them to go away completely. But, you know, Parliament has a role to play. It puts forward laws to propose to the public. And if people think that Parliament is getting it wrong, then every 3 years they have the right to change the Parliament and put in a team who will put different laws through. We think we've got the right laws going through, so we're happy to back those.
Minister for Youth, Hunting and Fishing and the South Island to Waipanumu, the Honourable James Meager. Tēnā koe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Julian.
Tērā pē te iwi a maharai hoana koutou ki te hui a te hui. Ki ngā kaiarahi takiru o te Pāti Māori. I tui tērā wiki, you may remember we had a little bit of a kōrero with the Māori Party co-leaders Debbie Ngārewa Paka and Rawiri Waititi last week regarding their suspensions proposed by the Privileges Committee from the debating chamber. Let's take a look at that kōrero now. Can I begin by getting your response, your reaction to the decision of the Privileges Committee in suspending you both for 21 days?
It's just so harmful and triggering when so many of our people are doing so much to get ahead.
I think about my parents at this time, who I lost within 12 months, and the sacrifice. My babies. My wife. And the people who have entrusted us to be here. And what I feel is that we are being punished for being Māori. The country loves my haka. The world loves my haka. But it feels like they don't love me. And that's they love my reo, but they don't love me. What I mean by me is us.
Now, we had a massive reaction to that interview, and just to note, the final decision for the proposed suspensions from the Privileges Committee is debated tomorrow in the debating chamber of Parliament. Next week, we discuss all the permutations for Budget 2025. That is, a te rā wiki hei te hui, e haere ake nei. Until then, e ngai wi, kia mau, ki te tūranga o Taputapu Aotea, haumi e, hui e, taiki e.
reo, te take.
Nā te puna whakatongarewa, te hui i tautoko.